This video is about our walk on the Pacific Crest Trail through Oregon and Washington in the summer of 2016. But this story really started 35 years ago when Shirley and I walked the California section of the Pacific Crest Trail for a honeymoon in 1981. A lot has happened in these ensuing years. We raised a family, had careers, moved from place to place. But one thing that always remained in the back of our minds was to finish what we started. We spent a lot of time preparing for this adventure, updating our equipment and preparing packages to mail to ourselves along the way. In 1981, we sent ourselves 3 packages, while in 2016 we prepared 9 packages for a shorter trip. We're glad we did, because resupply was more difficult in parts of Washington state. Backpackers have always been obsessed with weight and food. Technology has advanced, enabling lighter pack weight, but sometimes at a cost. Trail conditions have also changed. 35 years ago, the trail was still under construction. Several times we ran out of trail and had to bushwhack to proceed. Today, the trail is complete. In 1981, we went several days without meeting other people, whereas today, even in the remotest sections of northern Washington, we met a handful of people almost every day. But the one most significant difference since 1981 is unquestionably the smartphone and GPS. In 1981, all we had to go on was a book and a compass. But in 2016, we always knew exactly where we were and how far we'd come and how far we needed to go.
This trip took a lot of planning, but one thing we didn't count on was the amount of snow and blowdowns we encountered in southern Oregon. Huge trees covered the trail. We soon realized we couldn't make our goal of 12 miles a day, so we bailed out through the Sky Lakes Wilderness area. That was easier said than done. Snow covered the trail and blowdowns made the trail difficult to follow. We had to do some significant orienteering to find our way to the Cold Spring Trail leading to a still closed campground and a dirt road. We ended up hitchhiking to Mazama Village near Crater Lake, where we had our first resupply package waiting for us. We were fortunate to get a ride with Kathy, who took us all the way to the Crater Lake rim. At the campsite, we met Ashley, who stayed ahead of us and sent us invaluable texts about the trail conditions.
We took a 0 day to repack our supplies, but when we took off again, the weather took a turn for the worse. Crater Lake is at 7,200 feet, the highest point in Oregon or Washington, and even in the middle of June, there was still many feet of snow on the ground and more coming from the sky. We woke up to a half-inch of snow on our tent. We ended up detouring to Diamond Lake Resort, where we spent 3 nights waiting out the weather. After this, we got a ride to Wendigo Pass and proceeded on the Oregon Skyline Trail to Crescent Lake to avoid Diamond Peak, which was blocked by snow.
From Crescent Lake, we proceeded to Shelter Cove, where we had our second package waiting for us. Shelter Cove is on Odell Lake, noted for its salmon fishing. We took a 0 day, and while there we met a southbounder named Stargate and were treated to a kokanee salmon dinner by some local campers. Trail conditions improved after Shelter Cove, but we found that as the snow melted, the mosquitoes hatched. Thank goodness for our head nets. When we reached Elk Lake, we met 3 other PCTers heading our way: Kelsey, Brian, and Justin with his border collie Duke. Ashley texted that the Three Sisters Wilderness was buried in snow, and we learned that Mount Jefferson was buried too. So we all decided to skip the next section and meet at Ollerley Lake, some 94 miles ahead. On the way, we had to pick up our third supply package at Big Lake Youth Camp. Orley Lake was remote, pristine, and motor-free. It was beautiful. We looked south to Mount Jefferson and the blocked section we'd missed. From here north, we no longer were stopped by snow or trail conditions.
The next section was relatively flat, but the terrain became more interesting as we approached Mount Hood, the highest peak in Oregon at 11,240 feet. A short side trail took us to Little Crater Lake, where the deep water was 35 degrees Fahrenheit all year round. Soon we approached Timberline Lodge, which was featured in the movie The Shining starring Jack Nicholson. It was a popular spot with skiers squeezing out the last days of the groomed slopes. We helped ourselves to the famous among hikers all-you-can-eat buffet before we left. The scenery around Mount Hood was fantastic, but we had a difficult time crossing fast-flowing Sandy Creek. We eventually shuffled across a fallen log. This was one of many log crossings.
Eagle Creek is an alternative route to the official PCT, but was well worth the detour. The trail was blasted out of a cliff in places and went behind Tunnel Falls. It was July the 4th and very busy as we got closer to the trailhead. We counted 277 people. We were amazed that people were bringing small children and dogs up this dangerous trail. Our destination was Cascade Locks on the Columbia River, where we had our next resupply box waiting for us. We took a 0 day at Cascade Locks before crossing the Bridge of the Gods into Washington. David had to get his glasses fixed in Stevenson. Then we proceeded to pick up the trail again at Panther Creek.
After several cool, showery days with plenty of mosquitoes, a pleasant surprise awaited us. an unplanned detour to the village of Trout Lake. We found a cafe, a well-equipped general store, and some hiker accommodation in this friendly place. There was a list of volunteers to drive hikers to and from the trail. After filling our stomachs at Trout Lake, we proceeded to Mount Adams at 12,280 feet. It was much less touristy than Mount Hood and a good trail with views. As usual, since Mount Adams was a volcano, there were many lava fields. One thing we had to do each night was to hang our food to protect it from bears and other animals. We didn't carry a bear canister like what is required in places like Yosemite in California. Many people we met either didn't bother hanging, or if they did, they tied all their food together and then tied the other end of the rope to a tree. Some smart bears have figured out that all they need to do is cut the rope that is tied to the tree and the food is all theirs. Here I am demonstrating the counterbalance method, although it could be a little higher. This has two advantages. Since I only have to lift half of the food, it takes half the effort and puts less stress on the limb. Therefore, I can hang on smaller branches. Please.
A not so pleasant surprise was Goat Rocks. Not that it wasn't beautiful, it was. In fact, it was one of the highlights of the trip. But the trail along the crumbling knife edge and the snowy Packwood Glacier tested our nerves and abilities. We are backpackers, not mountaineers, after all.
We picked up a supply parcel at the Cracker Barrel store at White Pass and stayed in ski condos. Here we met other PCT hikers who gave us valuable information about trail conditions ahead. We found their names in logs as we progressed. Mr. Z, Barking Spider, the Ravens, who were a family with children of 9 and 14 who had almost finished the trail last year. And finally, Blondie and Turquoise, who we saw a lot of later.
We slept at the Uruk cabin, the only enclosed structure on the trail that we stayed in. It was maintained by a snowmobile club. We sat round a large campfire with two southbounders, and at dusk a herd of elk came into the meadow in front of the cabin.
Interstate 90 winds through the Washington Cascades at Snoqualmie Pass. At this ski resort, there was accommodation and restaurants. The Aardvark Snack Shack was a hiker meeting place with a PCT log and a hiker box.
Now we were entering true mountain country. The 70-mile section was easily accessed from Seattle and was very popular despite its ups and downs. A remarkable section of trail took us past the Kendall Catwalk, dynamited into a cliff with an 800-foot drop-off. The views were superb, and Mount Rainier stood out to our south. We stayed a night on a peninsula of aptly named Spectacle Lake. For 2 days, a heat wave sapped our energy, and we struggled up the hills. From Stevens Pass we hitched to Skykomish, where we had another parcel waiting for us. We stayed at a friendly hotel next to a railroad. The only drawback was that trains hooted and rumbled by outside the window at regular intervals throughout the night.
The next section went through Glacier Peak Wilderness. At 9 days, it was our longest section without a break and the most challenging. The trail climbed over passes and descended into deep valleys with few emergency exits, no forest roads, and few hikers. It felt a little scary in its remoteness. Help seemed so far away with no phone service. The scenery was breathtaking as we skirted Glacier Peak and circled around Kennedy Peak. Fire Creek was one of the most impressive passes, with views of more snow-covered mountains to our north and large patches of pink heather.
North Cascades. That's where we're going tomorrow. Going through Milk Creek. This is like a big rock quarry.
We descended 3,000 feet to cross a bridge over Milk Creek, then immediately switched back up to another mist-covered pass. The PCT was the only access to the steep-walled, remote valley.
As we descended along the rocky north spur of Kennedy Peak, we were amazed by magnificent meadows of purple lupins and white Sitka valerian covering the open slopes. We had never seen such masses of colour. The rocky high alpine territory was home to marmots, whose warning whistles we frequently heard. Pikers tended to be at lower elevations, as did bear and mountain lions. The trail switched back into the Suwattle Valley with its first growth Douglas firs. Someone had counted the rings of a downed tree, and it was about 900 years old. Glacier-fed Suwattle River was wide, fast-flowing, and impossible to cross without a bridge. A new bridge with steel girders replaced the former bridge that had washed away, as the bridges frequently do in these areas. There was an access road nearby, so we met more hikers.
Stehegan on Lake Chelan is a very interesting place. It is only accessible by boat, plane, or foot. Although there are cars, there are no roads leading to Stehegan from the outside. We picked up our last resupply package and spent 2 nights in the free campground. Facilities included a public shower, 1 public satellite phone since there were no cell service, a bakery, and a lodge. We bumped into Kelsey and Brian again, whom we had met at Elk Lake and had last seen at Mount Hood weeks before. Now we were in the North Cascades, a drier section. The previous year had had bad fires. Stehegan was evacuated and sections of the trail were closed due to fires. But our luck held and we had no problems with fire, although water was sometimes hard to find.
This section felt very different. It was spectacular, but didn't feel as remote, perhaps because there were more hikers and access trails. The weather was dry and sunny with comfortable temperatures. Hiking felt good. This section had 11 passes, but there were fewer ups and downs. Rainy Pass was the last road crossing before the border 62 miles ahead. At Hart's Pass there was a fire tower and a small Forest Service campground accessed by an unpaved road. Some dirt roads led to gold mines. There were green meadows and flowers still, but most of the snow had melted. This was a good time to be coming through. Earlier it would have been tough with all the snow, and later it wouldn't be as green. Winter starts early in these regions.
Woody Pass near the border was the high point in Washington, with views over to distant Mount Baker and the snowy peaks to our west. Below we could see Hopkins Lake, a pretty cirque where we spent our last night on the trail. The final destination was Monument 78 at the Canadian border. Here hikers lingered as they celebrated by taking pictures, writing their thoughts in the final log, and sharing stories with each other. There were several hikers completing the entire 2,650-mile trail, an amazing accomplishment. All were happy, but a little sad at finishing their trail journey.
I will say, on the plus side, we both lost so much weight doing this. It's a drastic way to do it.
Yeah.
Wave high. There's the book.
It was another surprisingly rugged 8 miles to the trailhead in Manning Park, British Columbia, Canada. Now we had to readjust to the real world.